of can't is where all of these billionaires and where every other successful achiever ends up going. You tend to think you're better than you are at something. And so idea sex is so powerful. It's a real powerful technique for creativity. Hey, Evan, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. This is such a blessing to just stay indoors all the time.
Right? I've seen you going live on Instagram like every 40 minutes. There's a new James Altucher IG live going on.
Yeah, no, I've been doing it once a day at 2 p.m. just to kind of, I feel like it's important to calm people down a little bit because there's so much. I mean, obviously this is a horrible crisis and people are rightly concerned and for many reasons, but I think the hysteria has gone beyond concern and beyond caution, and I think it's good to balance the panic in the news with the reality.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been trying to do.
I love it. Ladies and gentlemen, we got the legendary James Altucher in the house. How do we describe this man? Serial entrepreneur, angel investor, podcaster, comedy club owner, YouTuber, getting there?
Not quite a YouTuber yet.
I'm
trying to study your model, though.
We're working on it. I've been on his awesome show. He's been on mine. He's coming back. He's got a new book, Think Like a Billionaire. Can you actually get a hard copy of Think Like a Billionaire? Or is it only
but I'm not really selling it. I have hard copies that I kind of give out with other products, but the main place to get it, I think the best place to get it right now is on Scribd, Scribd. It's a Scribd original, so you can get the Scribd version, which is a digital version, and also the audio version. They sell an audio version, not a sell, but they give for free an audio version of the book, and they did a nice job editing it as well.
So your books have been covering such a wide range of topics over the years of you as an author. What now made you want to write about thinking like a billionaire?
Well, I've interviewed a lot of, let's call them billionaires on my podcast. Everybody from Mark Cuban, Richard Branson, Sarah Blakely, who's the founder of Spanx, many other people. Even if they're not billionaires, they've created maybe $1 billion products or companies. Like Damon John has sold $6 billion worth of clothes through FUBU. Tyra Banks has created a multi-billion-dollar franchise with America's Next Top Model. And, altogether, maybe there's about 15 to 20 billionaires I've interviewed. And the whole thing is that I've been so bad with money in my life. Someone asked me, well, why should we listen to you about how to think like a billionaire? You're not a billionaire and you go broke all the time. So I've made money many times and I've gone broke almost every single time. It's been an incredibly painful experience, depressing, horrible, horrifying. I don't want to wish it on anybody. And I started off dead broke, but I wasn't miserable then. I was kind of happy then. But then after you make money and you sell a business and you build it and then you lose all of it, you feel like years and years worth of work were for nothing and you got to start from scratch again. And it's just so painful. But I wanted to see from all of these other people, again, ranging from Ray Dalio, who's the biggest hedge fund manager in the world, to Mark Cuban and others, I wanted to see what did they do to kind of grow their money and keep it and then continue to grow it. And it's a special kind of personality. Like I could never make $1 billion because I would just sell before then. If I was building a company and someone offered me 1/100th of that, I would sell no matter what. But can I tell you one story?
Yeah.
So I was interviewing Peter Thiel, and he was the founder of PayPal. He was the first investor in Facebook. He made billions on Facebook. He made billions on another company called Palantir, and he was telling me how when Mark Zuckerberg, in the early days of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg was offered by Microsoft $1 billion for Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg would have made $250 million. He was a 24-year-old kid with no money, and he would have made $250 million. Can you imagine being 24 years old and being offered $250 million? And he said no. And the whole board, including Peter Thiel, was pushing him to say yes. And Mark Zuckerberg finally said, and this is what Peter Thiel was repeating to me, Mark Zuckerberg said, if I had $250 million, what would I do for the rest of my life? Well, I'd probably create a website where other people could communicate with each other. But I've already got that. So why would I need to sell what I already have and just do it again.
Mm.
And so, of course, now Zuckerberg's worth like I don't know 50 or 60 billion, and Peter Thiel made many billions on Facebook, so it all worked out. But that's a different type of mentality, a different type of mindset, and that's what I was interested in discovering. Like, is there consistent differences in mindset? And it was very interesting to talk to all of these people.
How much of the book and those interviews was prescriptive for you that you want to get better and learn from? Or is it, this isn't me, but I want to share their secrets?
No, it was very prescriptive for me. Like, I don't do a podcast with someone unless I want to learn from them. And I know you're the same way. That's why you always have the 10 lessons from so and so and so and so and so. Look, I learned. That's why I was when you were on my podcast, I'm just drilling you on how to get better at YouTube because I'm
Right.
selfishly trying to learn. And presumably, if I'm interested, then my audience is largely interested. And
Mhm.
I always am like eager to find out what makes someone tick. And I don't know. There were so many things I learned. Like, for instance, here was a common thing with many of these people. It's what I call the ready, fire, aim strategy that they all seem to use. Like, uh, a great example would be Damon John. This was a guy who was he was a waiter at Red Lobster, the casual dining chain, and on the weekends he would sew these hats and put a hip hop logo on it and just sell to friends or people passing by or whatever. And then he went to a clothing conference. He got a $300,000 order, I think, from Macy's, and he said, "Yes, I'll do it." And this is what I call ready, fire, aim. He couldn't fulfill a $300,000 order. He was just by himself sewing hats and logos onto hats. But he didn't say what I might have said or what many people would have said, which is, "Oh darn, how about I just do a $5,000 order for you and then I'll build up. I don't even have the money to do this. I don't have the employees." He just said yes, and I'm sure in his head he was thinking, "I'll figure this out. It's a $300,000 order. I will figure this out." And he then went and mortgaged his mom's house, and that weekend he hired a bunch of seamstresses. He filled up the house with all these people sewing. He finished sewing enough hats to fulfill the $300,000 order. Got delivered the hats to Macy's. Got the money, paid down the mortgage, and boom, he had some money. And by the way, he didn't full force start FUBU, his clothing empire. Even then, he still stayed as a waiter at Red Lobster until he really had enough orders consistently that he quit full time. And I find a lot of these billionaires actually to be extremely risk averse. You
Hmm.
would think these entrepreneurs, these billionaires took a lot of risk to get there. No, they're very, very risk averse. They do things, even though he said yes without knowing what he was doing, and he took the risk of mortgaging his mom's house. He knew he had a contractual order from Macy's. It was not like he was going to deliver and they wouldn't pay, and he knew how to make the hats. He could price it out. He knew he could hire these people. He could finish it in a weekend, and he did it. And Sarah Blakely with Spanx is a very similar story. She got a huge order from Neiman Marcus. She had not even made two versions of her product yet. And what did she do? She said yes. She had no factory, no manufacturer. She needed a manufacturer to fulfill this order. And she was, at the time, she was selling fax machines door to door. What manufacturer is going to return her phone calls? And yet she was able to persuade one to return her phone calls. She fulfilled the order and she made the money.
So what's the lesson for you in that? Because you don't strike me as a guy who's just sitting there planning and not doing, right? I mean, you've taken a bunch of risks. You've said yes to things. Is it just order of magnitude?
Yeah, I think for me, what I learned there is how to say risk in what seem like high stakes situations, but at the same time, you reduce the risk as much as possible. So when I've lost money, it's usually because I was saying yes to a lot of opportunities without really taking into account the risk. So I always assumed, oh, I sold my first company. I sold my second company. I know how to judge whether this is a good enough risk or not. And the reality is, I think in general, we're very poor judges of the risks that we take. We have this tendency to It's like I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you tend to think you're better than you are at something. So, for instance, 9 out of 10 drivers think that they are above the median drivers.
Right.
They think they're above average drivers, and that is just impossible. Like only 4 out of 10 will be above average, and I kind of learned to repeat to myself almost as a mantra that I am bad and stupid at everything, and I kind of make my decisions from that point of view to basically eliminate the risk as much as possible in every venture that I do. So for instance, let's say I want to try out a business, I'll figure out a way to experiment a little first. And by experiment, I mean try something where I can test out the idea, but risk very little money and risk very little time, but have enormous upside. And I think that's when you get into that kind of mindset, it's easier for you to do ready, fire, aim. So I'll give you another example is like Richard Branson. So he was already a successful magazine publisher. He was
Hmm.
27 years old. He was a music magazine publisher. And just like that, he decides, I want to start an airline. And everyone was like, and this is also a very common thing. Everyone basically said to him, Richard, you are crazy. You can't do that. You're a 27-year-old kid. You just know the music magazine business. And by the way, British Airways is a practically a government-run monopoly. There were no other airlines in England. How are you going to compete against a monopoly? And you need $100 million to buy an airplane. Where are you going to find $100 million? So Richard Branson, in very ready, fire, aim fashion, was like, no problem. And he calls up Boeing, and somehow he convinces Boeing to lend him a plane. He's 27 years old. He convinced them, he persuaded them to lend him a plane. So a lot of these billionaires have very strong persuasion abilities, and persuasion is a skill that can be learned and studied and mastered. You can start off as a very bad persuader, and you can end up being a very strong persuader. But Richard Branson had it. I think he had it from the beginning, and then he convinced Heathrow, give me a landing strip for a year. So he borrowed a plane, and he was going to return it in a year. He essentially borrowed from Heathrow a landing strip. JFK gave him another landing strip, and now he was an international airline all of a sudden. Boom! He didn't need any money up front. I mean, he did eventually, but that's like an amazing case of not taking any risks for himself, but starting an airline, which he then sold for billions, many years later, and now he's got a rocket ship company, Virgin Galactic.
So seemingly high risk to the outside world, but actually very low risk.
Yeah, like if he wrote a check for $100 million out of his
Yeah.
pocket, that would have been high risk. Instead, he risked pretty much almost nothing, and it cost him nothing to call Boeing and try to. If Boeing had said no, maybe he never would have started the airline, and we never would have known anything. He would have started some other business and been successful at that. I mean, he started over 300 businesses, but again, it's trying to do things as low risk as possible. And I feel like I had that mentality when I started off as an entrepreneur, but for many years I lost it. I was too overconfident. I was suffering from this Dunning-Kruger bias. And it's only when I started really reminding myself that I am an idiot, I need to reduce my risk as much as possible in every situation, that I really started to kind of not only make better money with less risk, but keep the money as well, which is really important.
What do you think is a $1 billion ready, fire, aim opportunity in front of James Altucher right now?
Oh gosh, I don't know, because the other thing is, and this is why I probably would never be a billionaire. Again, a lot of these habits that I learned from them have they do have something to do with entrepreneurship and making a $1 billion, but not always. Like you can do ready, fire, aim, or there's another one I commonly refer to as idea sex, where you take two ideas and combine them to a brand new, unique idea. Just a quick example: Tyra Banks took. And she described it to me how she loved the show America's Got Talent. She was also a supermodel who was kind of semi-retired. She combined those two ideas to create this show format for America's Next Top Model. All of her agents and all the TV, everybody rejected her, but no problem. Doesn't cost her anything to try to produce it, so she produced it. It got picked up, and now it's in its, I don't know, 31st or 32nd season. It's syndicated in over 100 countries or some enormous number of countries. It's a multi-billion-dollar entity, and that's a great example of idea sex, taking two successful ideas, combining them in a way no one surprisingly had ever done before, and having a huge idea. So this is more about just execution, creativity, productivity, getting things done. And I would say for myself, I'm not that interested in making, $1 billion, but these same habits, and I list a whole bunch of habits in the book that I learned from these guys and ladies, these habits I've been able to use in many other areas of my life. So for instance, and this is just an obscure example, but I don't know, 5 years ago, the owner of a comedy club that I knew of asked me to asked me if I wanted to do stand-up comedy for 5 minutes on their stage. I had no clue at all what I was doing, but of course I just said yes, because what's my downside? It cost me nothing, and it would take 5 minutes of my time, maybe a little bit more time coming up with material. And so I did it. And the worst that could happen is a random group of strangers in the basement of a bar would not like me, and then I would go home and never do it again. But I really enjoyed it, and it became a skill that I wanted to master and learn. It was a very difficult skill, and I've been doing it for the past 5 or 6 years. I just actually right before this whole crisis hit, I toured all over the Netherlands, did performances in many major cities there. I've been all over the country performing, and so now it's skill in my toolkit. Now I've made very little money from it. It's not a skill you want to learn if you want to just focus on money, but life's not just about money. And again, it's having kind of ready, fire, aim, and then even kind of coming up with material. There's a lot of idea sex in there and other habits and so on. But this is just some random area that I decided to learn, but I use the habits that I learned from these billionaires.
Did you label idea sex? Is that your idea?
I don't think so, actually. I think Matt Ridley talks about it in the book Rational Optimist, but
Okay.
I've certainly probably written about it more than anyone else, and I use it all the time. So I've even done workshops where I'll have people come up with a list of 10 ideas and then talk to your neighbor and combine your 10 ideas with his or her 10 ideas and see what ideas result. And it's always amazing, the results. Usually the first lists are boring, and then that combined list is like amazing. And so
Yeah.
idea sex is so powerful. I mean, just think about all the, even, how do they describe movies? When you pitch a movie, like George Lucas goes in and pitches Star Wars, he says it's a Western mixed with science fiction. Boom, idea sex, Star Wars. So there's so many examples of this sort of thing that it's a real powerful technique for creativity.
I think to a lot of entrepreneurs, they'll often come and say, hey, I want to do this or I want to do this. And the answer is you got to figure out a way to do both that nobody's done before.
Yeah, I mean, you see it all the time where,